In this lesson, we'll introduce two components, the box component and the container component. The container component is designed to center your content horizontally on the page. So it's kind of like a wrapper around your primary page content. The container component is responsive by default, which means it's going to shrink and grow in size as the browser shrinks or expands. In comparison, the box component is effectively a div. It's a component for organization. A lot of component libraries have an equivalent component for a div element. I'm guessing the intent there is to rely on the library's components as much as possible instead of regular HTML elements. So the similarities between the box and the container is they're both effectively wrappers. They're both effectively boxes and containers. But I think the intent here is that the container is meant to be used once, kind of as a centering wrapper around your entire content, while the box is intended to be used more generously just as a div or as an organizational box around related content. And we'll see how they both work in this lesson. So let's begin by importing both of these components from Material UI. So at the very top here, I'll do these imports in alphabetical order. So we'll start with box. I'm going to import box from @MUI/material/box. And on the line below, I'm going to import container from @MUI/material/container. All right, we're going to begin with our container component because as a reminder, that is the top level one that wraps all of our content and centers it horizontally in a responsive container. And we actually cannot return two top level components from a React component. We talked about this idea before. And so we're not going to be able to nest our container within our CSS baseline component either, since that is just a CSS normalization component. So what we're going to do is combine our container and our CSS baseline within a React fragment, and that will allow us to have both of those components as our top level. So as a reminder, the way we can do that is we can either use react.fragment, or we can simply write an opening and closing pair of brackets like so. So I'm going to wrap this after my CSS baseline, and that will use a React fragment right here. And within those contents, we can put as many top-level components or elements as we want. So I don't need this thing right here. I think that was just a prettier formatting issue. And below CSS baseline, I'm going to render a container, and I'm going to give it both a opening tag and a closing tag. Okay, so the container component accepts a prop called max width. And as you might guess, that is going to set the max width of the component. And so rather than pass in any kind of number for something like pixels, there's actually a bunch of string arguments that we can pass in. For example, there is SM for small, MD for medium, or LG for large. In this case, I'm going to pass in LG for large. And what that is going to do is set a max width of 1200 pixels for the container. So the container can be smaller than that, but it will never expand to be greater than 1200 pixels as the page grows. Now you'll notice if I save this, nothing shows up yet, and that's because we have no child content within our container. So there's nothing to render, so there's no height or width. So now I'm going to add a box right here. And this is going to be a big blue box that occupies the entire height of the page. So our container is kind of the centering thing and the responsive container around everything, and this box is going to actually create the background here. So this is going to be a self-closing component, and in order to style these components, for just about all of them in Material UI, there's going to be a prop called SX. And SX allows us to provide styles within a JavaScript object to this component. Now remember, when we're working with JSX, we need a pair of curly braces. That's what takes us into JavaScript land, where we can evaluate any valid JavaScript code within our JSX. And then within those curly braces, we need another pair of curly braces, which are now designated in yellow in my editor, and that's the actual JavaScript object declaration syntax. So one of those braces is for JSX, and then one of them is for the actual object. And in here, this works very similarly to how styles work. When we were talking about inline styles in React earlier, we provide an object where the property is the style, and the value is the corresponding assignment. Now, what we'll come to find out is some of these names that we provide here are a little bit different within the Material UI library. For example, if we were doing background color in our inline styles, it would be background color in upper camel case, background with a capital C in color. But for Material UI, if we want to provide a background color, we do BG color, all lowercase. And those are the kind of details that you discover as you explore more of the documentation. So what I'm going to do is give this box a background color. It's going to be a nice light blue, and we can represent that with hashtag CFE8FC. When I save this, nothing still appears because this box does not have any height or width, so there is no blue background to render from a space perspective. So the next thing I'm going to do is add a property here called height, and that allows us to set the height of this box. And I'm going to give it 100 of the viewport height. The viewport height is what the user sees in the browser, and we can do that with 100 VH. That's viewport height. Save that, and now we have a nice big blue responsive box. You can see on the right-hand side, this is occupying half of my computer screen, and you can see it's expanded to that size. But you'll notice as I expand it, it's here, it's also going to be responsive up until it gets to 1200 pixels, and then at that point, it's going to stop growing. So you can see at this point, it is going to be 1200 pixels, and as I shrink it down, it is going to start shrinking and being responsive. So we automatically get those benefits by having the Material UI team build us this responsive component out of the box. That is our container, and then our box is the actual blue box within that responsive container. All right, so this is just starting out by kind of building the initial background, and then in the next couple of lessons, we're going to add a header, we're going to add an input for our employee name, and then we're going to start rendering the actual cards for our employees. So I will see you in the upcoming lessons.